This is The Healthy Healer, where true voice is your medicine. This is where we help doctors and other healers navigate through the challenging times by learning from the best minds in the healing industry. Laugh, cry, and be surprised. It's entertainment, education, and inspiration so you can continue to be the unique and amazing healer you were destined to be. Welcome to humanity. Welcome to The Healthy Healer with Dr. Fred.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the next amazing episode of The Healthy Healer. And today we have indeed another healthy healer. And this time, really someone who has taken a whole lifetime to become who she has and has the chops and the history to explore how she became who she did and really gets underneath what it is that the conventional medical system has to offer by offering something entirely different, but really offering a sense of being able to truly heal. She's the author of a book called It's Not All in Your Mind, and she's been featured on television shows on Fox News, CBS, and healthcare summits and podcasts all over the country and probably all over the world. She trains clinicians worldwide in her approach and a comprehensive way to deal with chronic disease treatment. She has her own personal health odyssey, as we often see, and has had multiple debilitating conditions, and now has become fully vital and is a full-time avid snowboarder with a true zest for life. In our brief discussion, I'm impressed with Dr. Mueller's approach to life and who has she now become, and how her approach works is something that we're all going to learn together. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Diane Mueller. Dr. Mueller, thank you so much for being on The Healthy Healer.
Pleasure. It's my pleasure. And as you're reading my bio, I'm initially already thinking about this patient, right? These approaches that we see and these different ways of doing things and the different ways that we see our health care, say, paradigm look in our country, where I was talking to a patient last week who has a new onset of Crohn's disease, a very young patient. And this patient's 10 years old and has been suffering for years, got diagnosed by myself with Crohn's. And essentially, what so many friends, family, and relatives are telling him is just, you should just get on some medication. And so much of what I find in the disease process really is that diagnosis, like Crohn's, is actually, in my perspective, the beginning. Sure, sometimes medication has its place and its point, and I'm definitely one for having all the tools in the toolbox. But I think one of the biggest difference we see, and one of the points I want to make on our time together today is that whatever the diagnosis, whatever that, say, that root cause or whatever that label is, whether it's fibro, whether it's Alzheimer's, whether it's bone loss, whatever it is, there's a reason behind it. And the diagnosis really should most of the time be more of the beginning versus the end of our treatment plan.
Say more about that. I'm very curious about diagnosis. Of course, you might know that I'm the doctor, and there is an impact that giving someone a diagnosis has. In fact, creating the beast that you're giving them in the process of, as a diagnostician, giving someone a condition. One thing I like to say is, if you came into my office and you told me that you're not happy with the size of your nose, it's too big, you love peanuts, and you drink a lot of water, and you're clumsy, I might say to you, oh, that's all the criteria necessary to be an elephant. And then you're like, oh, cool, man, that explains everything. And then you go in and look up everything that an elephant is. You start getting the texture of the skin, and you start getting the big ears, and you start seeing all the things that an average elephant has. And then you walk out into the world with that diagnosis, having been told by me that you're an elephant and having agreed that you are based on the fact that you like peanuts, water, you're clumsy, and you have a big nose. There's a possibility that you then generate a diagnosis inside of your own mindset that becomes who you are. And in fact, maybe you're going to learn that your ears are too floppy and you should probably take some treatment or medicine for it, or that maybe you absolutely should never be in a crystal shop because you tend to cause damage, or whatever you learn. So what is the impact of a diagnosis, either at the beginning or the end? And how do you take that on? If someone has, they say they got Crohn's disease, or they say they have Lyme's disease, or they say whatever they say, and then they become that diagnosis is upon receiving it, even though they feel resolved with getting the initial diagnosis. After all, it explains all those things that they thought were wrong with them. Tell me a little bit about your take on it.
I disagree with everything. I want to make sure I said that. I said I just, not I disagree. So I just completely agree with everything that you said. And your elephant example is just phenomenal. It's just a great analogy of that exact scenario. And I think the word bittersweet comes up so many times in life. Like, I love the word bittersweet because it's such a good word that represents how things can have almost we can feel two different ways about something at the same time, paradoxically, right? And that's true with the concept of diagnosis, just like in your elephant example, where for people that I see, and I see so many people that have been struggling, like my classic patient is somebody who's been to a dozen doctors, who has had so many lab tests, has been told they are normal for so many years, and they are oftentimes struggling to get out of bed. Sometimes they can't. They're struggling to hold down jobs. They're struggling to be parents. They're just every day is basically a struggle to survive. Yet they're told they are normal. So there is an element in terms of that bittersweetness. There is an element I find when we can truly label something and say, oh my gosh, we found a reason, where I think it does give people some level of peace sometimes with actually feeling like they are not crazy, essentially. So that's like the sweet side. But then the very bitter side is everything that you're talking about. Is we get online or we get these hacks. And so I treat so much Lyme disease and the resultant things that are related to Lyme disease. So anything from chronic pain to chronic fatigue to chronic migraines, brain loss, depersonalization, and more. So all these symptoms oftentimes are hidden Lyme, which is now we know way more of a global problem than just this problem in the New England states of the United States. And what I see with Lyme, for example, is when people have finally have this diagnosis, the treatment's not working. What often happens is then they go to another doctor and say, hey, what's your special Lyme treatment? And they go to another doctor. And even I see this medically where it's like somebody might have seen 12 Lyme specialists. And once they get that, then everybody is just analyzing them from looking at that one thing versus saying, the treatment's not working because it's Lyme. And so I think the problem is just like with your elephant examples, like you get labeled as an elephant. And not only then do you see yourself as an elephant, the problem often is then the entire world and the medical community can start seeing you as that elephant too. And then we get into that box and we really don't get better. So that's that bitter side. But I do think there is an element where sometimes there can be this piece of, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, we found something, there is something wrong with me. But then from there, we need to say, actually, what's wrong is what the diagnosis is. All the diagnosis is confirmation that something is out of balance. All the diagnosis is your check engine light. It's, oh, yeah. The diagnosis in many things is like, oh, the car check engine light is finally working again to let us know there's a problem. But we don't actually know what the problem is. And I think we get confused sometimes with that diagnosis being like, oh, the check engine light, it's like that check engine light. The check engine light isn't saying, oh, it's coming from XYZ in the car. The diagnosis is just that light. It's not saying what the problem is. So all it's telling us is we got to look deeper. We got to figure out more. We got to figure out that why.
Yeah, very interesting. So the idea again is that the check engine light comes on, and maybe some of the things, at least, and you've said a couple times, the thing that you want to learn is that you're not crazy. And in my field, if you're not crazy, that really suggests is that there's nothing wrong with you. And in my world, as a psychiatrist, what I really want to tell people is maybe there's nothing wrong with you. The pains or the misery or the description of the problems that you're having psychologically, that you're anxious, that you're nervous, that you're fearful, that you're depressed, or that you're scattered, or that you're aimless, or whatever your issues are that are uncomfortable and probably represents some degree of an imbalance in this world, does not suggest that there's anything wrong with you at all. It just suggests that you're living in a very uncomfortable space at that time due to some degree of an imbalance somewhere. Now, The imbalance is often in the mindset. It's true. It actually is in the mindset. So if we could get that my body, myself, my spirit, my soul is responding to life as it should. In other words, there is nothing wrong with what's going on here with me. There's nothing wrong with me. There's something that may be contributing to us out of balance situation, to what appears to be a relative dysfunction. And a diagnosis often allows for that experience to take place inside of the client or the patient. In psychiatry, and I think this is often true and otherwise, coming up with an explanation so that people, like in this case, in psychiatry, people want to learn that they're crazy. In other words, not that they're crazy, but that they have some psychiatric condition that can explain why they do things that they're not aligned with, why they say things that they wish they didn't say, why they have behaviors that are misaligned with what their ideal self could or should be. What I would really love for you to address is the impact that a diagnosis has and how that informs your next steps with your customers or your clients, your residents or your patients, or whatever term you apply to that group.
Me too. And leading into that, I just want to comment also on just what you're saying there around psychiatry and the mind and all those things. Because my perception of this is the mind influences the body and the body influences the mind, right? And sometimes like we can get stuck in these toxic thought patterns, and that is creating the anxiety, and that can cause digestive problems, or that can cause immunodysregulation, all sorts of things. Or we can have problems in the body leading to neurological inflammation, leading to problems in the mind. And it's more this vicious cycle of the body influence, the mind influence of the body. And it's difficult to separate. So that leads us into answering your question, because regarding then, okay, we have the diagnosis. Where do we go from there? There's really two different places. And we go to all the physical root causes, all the body root causes. But then we also talk about the mind, because the body influences the mind and the mind influences the body. So from a standpoint of what actually is the reason behind the diagnosis, right? So it is going to depend a little bit upon the diagnosis. And one of the things, as a naturopathic doctor, as a functional medicine doctor, as a doctor of acupuncture and oriental medicine, one of the things all of my different trainings have really taught me is that the body works so holistic. So we can have a GI parasite, which, by the way, do not come up on most labs. There's so many parasites that burrow, that hide inside our cells, that are not going to show up on most standard cultures and PCR tests. And so from that standpoint, this example, we can say, okay, a parasite can actually cause inflammation of the brain. A parasite can cause liver abscesses and detox problems. A parasite can cause joint pain, can cause chronic inflammation. We can go on, because the problem, even though the problem lies in this particular example in a parasite in the gastrointestinal tract, it can cause problems all over the place. When we're looking at the physical side, when somebody has the diagnosis, we need to really begin to say, okay, organ system by gland, by tissue, by cell, where are the levels of possible dysfunction? And then for somebody with, say, chronic fatigue, for example, I'll use that as an example because that's so common and so many people have this. We start with the basics around, is it an adrenal problem? Is it a thyroid problem? Is it a hormone problem? Is it a micronutrient problem? Do we have deficiencies? Do we have mitochondrial problems? But once those things are ruled out, we look at toxic overload. We look at chronic hidden infection, for example. And so we're looking at some of those root causes to say, why is the body not creating the energy it needs? And so though that's like the body side of things. The other thing I'll say on the body side of things is it's really important to analyze labs correctly. Like, for example, so many people, this is really getting to me. So many people are told their thyroid is normal, or so many people are told they are like slightly abnormal, and they get put on something called levothyroxine or Synthroid. And this is basically it's basically not bio, it's T4. It's basically the form of thyroid that is not active. Well, what T4 can actually do is convert to something that we call reverse T3. Reverse T3 will block thyroid activity. So if you have too high of reverse T3, you can put all of the normal synthroid and all the normal levothyroxine. But if it's converting to this reverse T3, your labs are going to look normal and you're going to be tired. You're still going to be hypothyroid. And yet we're not running the correct labs to address that. So that's one example of many I could give around like diagnostics around we need to do all these different root causes and look organ by gland, but then make sure that we're getting the right labs run. We can't just order a standard TSH and free T4 for our listeners that have had thyroid. It's very standard thyroid tests. We can't just order those and say because those look normal, it's working. We got to go deeper than that. And then the secondary component, body affects the mind, affects the body. That's one of the reasons why my book is It's Not in Your Mind is because of that, right? It's because I see this relationship of mind, body. And I talk about a lot of that in my book. And in the mind side of things, one of the things we really want to address is almost like exactly what you're talking about with that elephant example. I really think that's so brilliant because essentially, with that example in the mind, we have this diagnosis, and then what happened? Well, we wake up in the morning, we oftentimes start doing what I call the body scan, where it's like, oh crap, I'm an elephant. Oh my gosh, I'm an elephant. Oh boy, oh, here we go. And the mind starts worrying, and the mind starts worrying, and the mind starts worrying. And we get stuck in that thought loop. When we get stuck in that thought loop, then one of the things that happens is because the anxiety worsens, because the adrenaline worsens, because of the cortisol worsening, we get changes in serotonin. We get changes in our brain neurotransmitters. We also get changes in our immune system. We also get changes in the ability of our body to fight disease. We also get changes in the ability of our body to repair itself. And so then we get in this vicious cycle where it's like then the thought processes of, oh crap, I'm an elephant. I don't want to be an elephant. This is horrible. And those processes in the mind worsen the experience of the body, making it harder to get out of the thought loop of the minds because we're more inflamed. So that's one part of the treatment and part of the working with the diagnosis is also going in and saying, okay, how do we get the nervous system? How do we break those vicious thought loop cycles that oftentimes are happening in our subconscious, in our overdrive subconscious, sympathetic type of go-go adrenaline survival type of state? And that's what I talk about in my book. I imagine those are things that you do in your work as well. So that's a part of this is getting people out of that vicious cycle of the mind so we can then make sure that the diagnostics and the root causes when we go after them in the body are more effective.
Interesting. Yeah. The root causes and diagnostics are really a fascinating concept. As we all know, and we've been taught in school and maybe taught in our experience that correlation does not imply causality. And we often really get that we're pressed up against that wall. So something is happening. We have a lab that's out of whack, or we got a parasite in our body, or we got a parasite that has been discovered or identified in our system one way or another. And given how we look at how things work holistically, we latch on to what might be what we call the root cause. We look at the one thing and say, see how everything is like an astral projection from this one thing. Now, it turns out that if we could look at any one of the things on the holistic level and call that the root cause and have everything else be a correlative secondary response to wherever it is we start from. So with that theory, or with that notion in mind, with the construct notion in mind, how do we actually know, or what is it that we can utilize to know where to start from? What is a root cause? How deep do we go? The conventional practice is that we can find the root cause perhaps by doing lab, or perhaps by identifying parasites, or there's some sort of notion that if that exists, that's what's causing the rest of this holistic picture. But as I really do continue to have an inquiry and have my whole diagnostic career, what causes what isn't entirely clear, and what's at the bottom of a heap is definitely not clear ever. And yet there is an agreement reality that has it be that if you have a parasite, that's what's causing all these bacterial changes. That's what's causing these cellular abnormalities. That's what's causing these metabolic abnormalities, it's experiential abnormalities. But is that clear or does that just fall into our reasoning that at the heart of the matter here, there's a parasite, or at the heart of the matter, there's a low reverse T3 laboratory result or something like that. Like, how do we know what the root cause is? And is it possible that sometimes we think something's a root cause and it simply isn't? It's just a correlative.
I love this question. I feel like we're getting into like the semantics here. And I think it's really important to do so because I just think people are so confused about this. And sometimes there's almost this hyper obsession to, but what is the root? What is the root? What is the root? And so while this is important, the conversation on root is important, we want to make sure that we are understanding the principles as practitioners as well as patients and not getting lost in the details of what we actually mean. So the question is like, what do we mean? What is the root? And right now I'm thinking of a particular patient who working with Lyme disease and mycotoxin illness, a lot of fatigue, a lot of brain fog, a lot of vertigo. And one of the things that we are in discussion with is he actually is an example of this reverse T3 scenario I was talking about. And reverse T3 is abnormal, and we're looking at that. And he's very resistant to actually doing any thyroid replacement therapy. And he says, well, we have to get to the root. And as we have found some of the roots, and that's one of the points, right, is that there's really never, we say root cause, if we are truly talking about a cause in the singular, then I think it's a very difficult and improvable. There's no way to actually ever prove what the root is. If somebody has an acute situation, and I think this is where we get lost in medicine because it's like somebody has a sore throat and a fever and they go in and they get a strep culture and it's positive and they take an antibiotic that fights that. And when that acute scenario, we can say, okay, strep, that infection, that bacteria is pretty much the root cause. Or
No, I don't. I
and that's where it's going to go next.
Yeah, it's only a correlative. It's only a correlative lab finding only.
And that still brings us to a standpoint of even if it is true, right? Even if there is an infection, why did they have the infection? Why is their immune system weak enough, right? Why could the immune system not fight it off? Was that due to diet? Was that due to lifestyle? Was that due to stress? Was that due to some genetic that made them more like less immunoresistant to this particular infection? So it gets very complicated, I think, then to figure out and to say what is that root. And in this particular patient, my point was like, yeah, we had found toxic metals, we had found mycotoxins, we had found a ton of other environmental toxins, we had found multiple infections, all these different things. And maybe they were the reason that the thyroid got out of balance. Maybe they contributed to this reverse T3. And all of that being said, we still have this situation where we have the thyroid still needs to be fixed, right? And so just getting rid of those things, even though we've seen Lyme titers go down, mold markers get better, all these different things, the thyroid did not come back online. So in that example, even if those things did cause the thyroid to go out of balance, and we'll never know, maybe it went out of balance for other reasons, stress does that, we still have to go in and fix the damage of whatever those things are. And so the biggest thing, like my favorite question in medicine is why? Why did that happen? And we go why far back enough. It's like, why did they get this infection? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? And we go back, we could maybe try to establish some level of what we think the root is. But maybe with AI and all the advances in technology, we're going to have some sort of way of like deeply getting into the body with nanobots or whatever we're going to use in the future to figure out like what the root is going to be. I don't know where medicine's going to be in the next 20 years, but I'm sure it's going to be way beyond where we can even imagine it. And maybe at that point, we will have some sort of technology that can actually go in and like almost trace the history of the disease process in the body to find that. But right now, everything is correlative. Like you said, it's always like we get statistical analysis and we say, based upon our best processes of putting them together, this is our sense. And that's why medicine is not just a science. Medicine is an art. It's an art of being able to recognize patterns. It's an art, and again, of being able to recognize changes in progression of treatment. And it's an art of working together very closely with people. This is why I only take on so many people in my practice, because I like to read studies and then think, because I only have a limited number of people I practice, be like, oh, that might actually apply to that person. And I write it down and we talk about it in the next treatment, and it's collaborative because there's such an art to it. And it's not just A plus B equals C. And medicine doesn't work that way. And I think so many people, when they're looking for that root, they think, oh, it's science. It's like fact. And it's not. It's science. It's educated guesses. It's very smart hypotheses.
Mhm. So I like to say that at the heart, and it seems like you touched on this, but the heart of all healing is a human connection. And this is really important. And I see how important it is to you as well. And I wonder what the curative value is in the idea, frankly, of root cause for me. And maybe I'm looking through some kind of filtered glasses as well. The root cause is often associated with how well I'm humanly connected. Where is my resonating harmonics with the all of humanity or with the people in my inner circle? How connected am I? When I'm not connected, it sure does seem that I open myself up to getting diseased in multiple levels, and many times through expressions of things that otherwise look like they're physical and unassociated with any of my like relational behaviors or experiences. But when I am connected, when I feel like I'm here with humanity and I'm listening and I'm curious and I'm out of my own way and I'm interested and I'm forgiving and I'm accepting and I'm compassionate and I'm kind and I'm gentle and I'm loving and all of those things, my ailments just disappear. What do you think about all that?
I think it's one of many components, right? I think the pandemic was a good example, a real is better than the word good. It was a real social experiment of the impacts of social isolation. And I think another thing I see in a lot of my client population who is very socially isolated, people that are like literally afraid to go out to eat because the last time they did, they had such crazy histamine reactions, and they were in bed for 3 days because of some bad oils. That's like the level of sensitivity of some of my patients in the beginning. And so there is this natural social isolation that happens with that. And this is where I feel like we get into a chicken and the egg, and we get into one of my favorite topics in medicine, which is the vicious cycle topic, where I do think social isolation can absolutely cause disease, right? I think we're not meant to live in bubbles. I think people bring us joy, people bring us validation, people bring us support and laughter and so many things. And that's why snowboarding is such a big thing. You read in my bio, it's why it's like part of my life, and I make it a priority because it's part of my healthcare plan. It's part of what allows me to show up for my patients 120% is because I get filled up from my friends, my social, from connecting with nature. And that allows me to put so much time and effort and brain power into my work. And so, yes, I agree with all of that. And from my perspective, it is a vicious cycle where I also see these situations where people get so sick, and it's the sickness that starts first, and then they can't even go out to eat, or they go out and they go for a 20-minute walk with their friend, and the next thing they know, they have to take a 7-hour nap, literally, because it exhausts them so much. So then we got to get them well enough so they can start socializing again. So I see it as so much of this as like chicken and the egg, both. And that tends to be my perspective on medicine is like more like both and than either or. Usually I feel is what I see to be as close to truth more of the time.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yes, both and. All right, so we're running up to near the end. If there's an illusion out there that people have about disease and medicine, what would that be?
Oh, there's a few. There's a few. I think we've already named a few. The diagnosis is the end. The diagnosis is the root. Another big one that I talk about a lot is the illusion that there's this one perfect diet that is like the diet that is the perfect diet for everybody. And not only is there not one diet that I recommend for everybody and not one diet that I think is perfect for everybody, I think it changes. I think it changes by our age. I think it changes by what's going on in our body. I think different points in our life and different situations call for different lifestyle plan. So, that there's an illusion around there's one perfect thing. There's a illusion around what we said around one root cause. There's a illusion around it being only in the mind or only in the body, or these systems not being connected. So I think we named a lot of them. Another thing that I think is important to name is that healing has to be hard. And I think there's an illusion of that, but there's also an illusion of healing is supposed to be easy. And I don't think either one of these are really true. I think oftentimes these situations it's more of a middle ground of, yes, we need to put effort into our health, but we're not supposed to live in a bubble. Like some people, when we talk and I talk about various things of the treatment process, I'll say, okay, for you at this point in life, it would be probably beneficial to try X, Y, and Z diet while we're doing this. I use a low histamine diet sometimes, for example. And sometimes people are like, and they'll write these long emails. I'm like, oh, well, this is not like living in a bubble. So the body is supposed to be resilient. And this thought around we have to control every little thing in our environment in order to live a perfectly healthy life, I think is being promoted online sometimes. And I also think is a little bit of an illusion. A healthy body, in my perspective, is a resilient body. We do what is right and we do good things most of the time. And then if we do something that is not perfect, a resilient body can handle that and process that, can stay on track and can be extremely healthy around it.
Cool. Great. Thank you, Dr. Mueller. Dr. Mueller, where can people find you if they want to learn a little bit more, or maybe get an inside look to your book or some of the research or some of the findings and some of the work you're doing? How can people get attached to you? What's the best way?
Easy. If you go to getwellquiz.com, that's my online quiz. I developed that as a way for people to just take this quiz. I spent months developing this with a developer and beta tested it and all that. And the idea with the getwellquiz.com is for people to be able to go in, to put in their symptoms and to get a list of tests that they might not have thought about ordering. So as this starts stimulating them to say, oh, what other root causes, plural, could be happening here? So that's getwellquiz.com. And of course, my book is available on Amazon all over the world. It's Not in Your Mind by Dr. Diane Mueller. And that's pretty easy. You can find my practice at mylymedoc.com.
Awesome. Dr. Mueller, thanks for being a great guest for The Healthy Healer. It's been a pleasure to learn a little bit about you and how you got to be. We didn't really get back into your history about what got you here, but I think this discussion about the illusion and disillusion of what disease is made of was very valuable. And I totally appreciate that and appreciate you and the work that you've done. And it's clear you have a whole foundation here of how you got to be who you got to be. Maybe next time we can go into a little bit of that, or if people want to read about your history, I'm sure they can do that at your website, and et cetera. All right. Thank you for being here, Dr. Mueller. We'll catch you on the flip side. Bye, everybody. And thanks for being here, and really appreciate you. And we'll see you on the backside. Bye.